All right, great. It's 5 past the half hour, so we might get started. So I would like to welcome everyone to our event this evening and also to everyone listening to the recording. Thank you all for filling out the poll as well. We'll get to that in a second. But on behalf of my team, I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of country and pay my respects to the traditional and rightful owners of the land. For me, I live and work on the land of the Indigenous people of the Wurundjeri country of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to them and to their elders past, present and emerging, and also to anyone here who identifies as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. I pay my respects. So I'd just like to introduce the team I have with me tonight. So firstly, my name is Sarah, for those of you who haven't met me before, and I run the GAMSAT and meta entry programs here at Halad to Health with some of the wonderful team is here with me tonight. So I'd like to introduce you first to Max. Max, if you want to say hello and a bit about who you are.
Hi, I'm Max. I'm on section 1 with you guys today. I'm an upcoming MD1 at Uni Melb, starting 1.5 weeks. Very excited about that. I know, fun fact about me. I love water skiing. I water ski at least once every summer. Good fun. Okay.
Cool. Water skiing, Max. Awesome. Thank you. And Amlan?
Hi, everyone. My name is Omlan. I'm currently a first-year medical student at Notre Dame, Sydney. But I'm currently in Adelaide. My journey with Halad actually started just from attending one of these mini mock sessions back in 2020. And then I went through their course, loved it, and then decided to join the team because it was such a great experience. And today I'll be taking us through section 2. I'm also one of the section 2 markers at Halad as well.
Terrific. Thank you. And Karim.
Hi, everyone. It's really great to see you all here today. So as Sarah mentioned, my name's Karim. I'm one of the Section 3 leads here at Halad to Health, so I help run the Section 3 team. I also help run the podcast that we do at Halad. So a quick little plug for that. It's called the Making of an Incredible MD by Halad to Health. Have a look at it on Spotify. We've got some great stuff on there about the GAMSAT, if you guys are looking for tips and tricks. And yeah, it's really great to see you all here today.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And yes, definitely feel free to check out the podcast. And there's also some great MMI prep things on there too. So keep it in mind for later down the track when you're prepping for interviews. I can give you a link to the podcast later as well. So with our team tonight, just some things I'll share the poll so that Max, Amlan and Karim can see where everyone's at. So about a third, in fact, exactly a third of you have not been to a Halad event before, so welcome. And about half of you have sat the GAMSAT before, and for half of you, it's your first time. So particularly for you 3 tutors, just to keep in mind that for some people, they haven't sat the GAMSAT before. So we'll try and keep our advice and tips and things as appropriate to that as possible to help you out. Cool. So for those who haven't been to a Halad event before, or those who don't really know who we are, just a little bit about us in that we are a GAMSAT company, in that we do provide GAMSAT services and tuition and lots of free events like this one, but we also are actually a charity. And we use the profits from our GAMSAT programs and other programs that we run to help us to send money over to the Philippines and run impact programs over there. And these impact programs help with public health and help with young people receiving the health education that we often take for granted here. And so that's predominantly what we do. And our GAMSAT programs not only help us to fund that, but also help us to run those missions, because a lot of our GAMSAT students have the opportunity to go over when we run those missions in the Philippines. Unfortunately, we're not able to run any of them during the pandemic, but a lot of us on our team actually have been able to go to these missions in the Philippines, and we're hoping to run them in the future, hopefully within the next year, actually. So that's a little bit about what we do. I'm going to tell you a bit about how we'll run tonight, and then we'll get straight into it. So I will be your host this evening. I will give you all the links and the things that you need to know, but I'll be taking a back seat on the content, and our tutors will be running you each through their respective sections. So what you're going to be doing is a small version of a mock exam for each of the sections, and then we'll pause in between and get a little bit of feedback, tips, get some advice on the answers from each of the tutors. So for section 1, you'll have about 15 minutes. You'll have 13 questions, which for those of you who've already calculated, that's a little bit short on time for section 1, but we've given you a shorter, like, sort of question set. There's not really any long text tonight. And Max will give you some advice as well afterwards. And then we'll go through section 2. We'll tell you a little bit more about how we'll do that when we get there. And then section 3, you'll get a taste of some questions as well. All of these questions are GAMSAT standard, and they're questions from previous mock exams that we've run. So you should be able to get familiar with some of the content. How do we access the questions? I will send you links and you'll be able to have access to them after the event as well. Those links won't expire. So I'll put them all in the chat for you. Cool. So can I get a thumbs up if that makes sense and if everyone's happy with how that is going to run? Terrific. Okay. So all we need to do then is I'm going to grab some links for you. All right, so the first link is going to have all of the questions that you'll be doing for section 1. And if you've never done section 1 before, or if you've never touched GAMSAT stuff and this is your first touch point tonight, all you need to do is read the text and have a go answering the questions. They're relatively comprehension style. Just have a go. And then when you think you are set on what answers you want to put for each one, then the second link is like a Google form for you to submit your answers. So I'm going to get up a timer for 15 minutes. Cool. All right. Can I get like a thumbs up or a nod that you can see the timer and that those links were all good? Great. Okay. So when the 15 minutes is up, I'll pass you over to Max and he will run through answers. But if you get really stuck along the way, the chat is open. So feel free to send either me or Max a message and we'll help you out. But otherwise, you can start your 15 minutes.
All right. So hopefully you guys found that pretty stimulating. Just quickly before I start, some stats. The average score for those 13 questions was 6.6, the range between 4 and 10. Just so you guys know where to place yourselves. I'm going to share my screen now so you can see. Is that popping up all right for everyone? Okay. So as a preface as well, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself, interrupt me, write it in the chat. I should have that handy as well, and I'll get to it as soon as I see it. And that being said, let's get started. So when it comes to section 1, I'm a big advocate for sort of thinking ahead while you're reading the text. I really put an emphasis on reading really critically and actively and just trying to predict what questions could come up as I'm reading it. And a really good way to do that, not just for a comments text, but for any text, is to just sort of have little checkpoints for yourself. And when you've got these comments, it's really nicely separated into 4 separate parts for you. And a really good exercise to check your understanding is to just summarize each comment as you can in 1 sentence, in your own words if you can. So if I were to do this, I would say this is about some people's vices, their coping mechanisms, their negative ones: smoking, drinking, pills, a shot. Regardless of what it is, it always hurts the same. So people's vices is what I'd say for comment 1. For comment 2, it's talking about someone's experience with their self-harm. So I'll probably just assign that in general, self-harm experience. For comment 3, it's 1 sentence already, but if I was to reword it, I would say rich culture is perhaps the most meaningful thing in this world. in a nutshell. And for comment 4, this is about resilience and coping mechanisms. And, it's not about how you fall down, it's how you get back up, that sort of thing. And having those summaries in place really sets us up to answer the questions even before we look at them. And just another tip, with these comments, you can almost 100% guarantee you're going to be contrasting and comparing the texts, all the 4 texts to each other. So just keep that in the back of your mind as you read through these as well. Try and find the similarities and differences. So perhaps something I would look for here is what's in common or what's different about all these texts. And you can kind of pick out a little theme here of people's coping mechanisms. So as in comment 1, self-harm is a coping mechanism. Culture is a way of coping with the world, being resilient and having good coping mechanisms to be able to bounce back. So if you're asking yourself these questions, I haven't even looked at the actual questions you guys answered, then you should be really set up. You'll notice the first question, which of the 4 comments are most similar in their focus. If you've had that little 1-2 sentence summary in your head, this should be easy to pick. 1 and 2. So if we go back in a couple words, this is resilience, this is talking about how great culture is, this is self-harm, and this is people's their vices. I would argue that self-harm falls under that. So comment 1 and 2 have the most similar focus here, a negative coping mechanism. And that's the answer that we get here. Moving on to question 2, you'll notice which of them can be linked to each other by which theme? They could all be linked to each other by which theme? So I've already asked myself this, and I said, this is about, how we cope with our lives and how we struggle. So we scan the multiple choice, see resilience, could be definitely in the last one. Oops. Coping with responding to life. I like that one quite a bit. It matches up with what I had going in the back of my mind. Overcoming challenges, addiction, I'm still happiest with B because that matches up with the linking theme between all of them the most. You notice that some of these answers cover some but not all, and the best answer in this case is the one that covers all of them the best, being answer B. Question 3, the final 2 lines of comment 1, regardless of what it is, it always hurts the same, enables the reader to. So let's go back and have a look. We have a series of people's vices, regardless of what it is, it always hurts the same. Let's look at our options. Understand that addiction is a burden rather than a choice. While that is true, that's not the reason that final line is there. Or at least I'm not thinking it is. I'll just sort of keep it in the back of mind, see if I find a better one. Feel sympathy towards the author. When I'm reading this, I didn't really feel any involvement from the author. He was just talking about people in general. So I'm not too certain on B there. C, make sense of something foreign to them. That could be the case. However, it's kind of a bit off, like what this statement is saying, regardless of what it is, it always hurts the same. That's sort of opening it up to the reader. You guys will have your own methods of coping, perhaps some bad ones in there. Regardless of what it is, it always hurts the same. I think answer D is the best here. Relate to the poem, even if they do not personally identify with any of the examples. We all have our negative vices. It always hurts. It always shouldn't be done, etc. So I had a couple of options there that made a little bit of sense, but if I just process of elimination, the D at the bottom there makes the most sense with what the author wanted this statement to do in this poem. Just check here with the chat. Comment 2 is an example of, so comment 2 was the self-harm experience of this young girl. So there's an example of, let's have a read. What stands out the most? The climax of this story is when, and what this girl is talking about, is when she was confronted at her job. And the gentleman said this: I know what this is, I've seen a lot of this. It's very sad. You're a bright young girl, a whole life ahead of you. What have you been doing that for? So in this scenario, I would try and put myself in that girl's shoes. I've had this awful experience, negative mental health, and I'm doing my best to recover. And I think she says, wear her scars with pride, which is a very difficult journey to do. Someone saying this to you is not particularly helpful, and honestly, probably quite deflating for this girl, and pretty insensitive. So let's check the answers to see what matches up with that. Insensitivity in response to people's growth trajectories, that could be a good answer. Audacity people have to make unsolicited comments about a stranger to their face. It could be that. I'm thinking A is a little bit better here though. Lack of health literacy and awareness exhibited by the wider community. I'm tossing up between A and C at the moment. Mental health advocacy. Not quite matching what the message of this comment is. So I'm tossing up between A and C. And whenever you have a 50-50 like this, which you'll find is very often the case in section 1, you have to go back and look for, first of all, look at the question. This is an example of, and then we have to look at the evidence being shown to us. Insensitivity in response to people's growth trajectories. My argument as to why I wouldn't pick that over C is it's probably not specific enough to the text. This is very, very much about being mentally aware and an example of why spreading this awareness is a good thing, so that experiences like hurtful experiences like this don't occur, which would lead to someone picking C as the better answer, hopefully. Question 5, which of the following would the author of comment 3 consider most beneficial? So comment 3 was the one about how great culture is. Culture is a great thing. And going back to comment 5, all of these are wonderful things to do. However, I'm keeping an eye out for culture here. Spending time with family and loved ones could be that. Learning about yourself, the heritage in the world, I think that matches pretty closely. Embracing life on days everything feels impossible. Mindful of others. B is still the best answer that matches up to what comment 3 is saying the most. So just that process of elimination there. I'm going to move on to unit 2 now, but if there are any questions, please send them through. So here we have the poem Bees, and very quickly we get this description of this couple, this married couple walking to a pond. It's slimy, it's gross, there's lots of bees around, it's not very pleasant. And they start swimming and the bees are everywhere and it's not all that good. And then what stands out right at the end here is after 20 years of marriage, what isn't surprising so much the person you are with, but to find yourself so out of place in this scene, cold, not be able to get out, stepping over so many bees, which kind of links this whole experience back to a metaphor for her marriage. It was highlighted right at the start here. And if you can pick that out right as you're reading it, you'll be super well set up to answer the following questions, because that is really the main thing that this poem is saying. It's like, my marriage is an unpleasant place. I don't want to be here. So if we look at question 6, appropriate title, The Day in the Swamp, out of place, bugs, so many bugs, cold and lonely. Out of place really matches that sentiment that this metaphor is trying to convey. And immediately I'm quite confident that that's the best answer. Question 7, due to the story described in this poem, how can the author's marriage be described? Long marriage coming to an end, a broken marriage, a supportive yet unsatisfying relationship, an adventurous marriage. Immediately eliminating D, this is quite, it's not a very positive poem, but D is a quite positive answer. A supportive yet unsatisfying relationship. You want to look in the text for evidence here, and I'm not seeing much mention of there being good support, but it's not that, but even so, it's not that good. It just sort of mentions that she's not happy there. As for broken, similar thing applies. There's nothing to say in this text that the marriage is dysfunctional, just that the author is really unhappy where she is. So a long marriage coming to an end is probably the best answer here. And she talks about getting out towards the end here as well, which further supports that coming to an end part. Question 8, which word describes the tone of the poem? So similar thing to what I just did, I'm looking for no positive answers. So adventurous and optimistic, I'm pretty happy I can dismiss. So that leaves me with B and C, pessimistic and reflective. And reflective is the better answer here, because even though it's not quite happy poem, it's not a particularly sad poem either. The situation itself from an outsider might be called sad, but really it's the author just thinking about how this awful place she describes is really similar to a marriage. And it's quite pensive in that aspect, which would place C as the better answer here. Which literary device is essential for delivering the main message of this poem? I've sort of been thinking about that right from the start. It's the metaphor. The simile could be a tempting option here, but just keeping in mind that simile is when something is like something else, and there is no explicit comparison in this poem. Rather, it's just calling it as it is. My marriage is like this place, not is like this place. My marriage is a dark, gloomy, bee-filled bog, which is quite powerful metaphor. And the last question, I think, is the hardest question of this text. Describes the personality of the main character. This requires a pretty firm understanding of what the author is saying and what she's doing here. We know that she's unhappy with her marriage and she wants out. So what would best describe that? Is she determined? Perhaps a little bit to get out of her marriage, although perhaps a little bit too similar to before, perhaps a little bit too positive for my liking. So I'm just going to look to other options. Loyal doesn't really describe the sentiment that she has. You know, I want out of here. While she might have been loyal to her husband, that's not what this poem's portraying, and not what the poem's really about either. Unfaithful, there's no mention of her being unfaithful at all. Similar to her being loyal, there's no mention. Fearless, she's unhappy and she's wanting out and is probably going to strive for that and is likely actively striving for that. And if you're in that position, that's quite a tough spot to be in. You have to be pretty brave to try and do the best for yourself and exit a marriage of 20 years that's making you unhappy. So fearless is probably the best answer here. Moving finally onto the cartoon. You might be thinking, how do I actively read and critically read in a cartoon if it's all visual? And the way I like to do this is just break everything down individual elements. This is quite a simple cartoon, luckily. Sometimes there's lots of elements for you to consider, but in this case, there's really only 3. The first is the father. Well, before we even start, we should ask ourselves what's going on here. We've got a father tossing his kid up in the air, which isn't too out of the ordinary. Then we look at the father, he's having a good time, showing his love to his kid. And before we look at the speech bubble, the kid looks like he's having a pretty good time too. Very stereotypical picture here. Then we look at the speech bubble. Unfortunately, this lady expressed glee and stark raving terror in the exact same way, and that's where the humor comes in. That sort of contrast of, oh, look at this happy scene, and like, oh my God, this kid's terrified, someone help him out. And that's where the humor is. So how is that best described? Satirical, meaning making fun of in a kind of nasty way sometimes. Not quite the best match, nor as childish, apart from the fact there's a child in here. Ironic, maybe a little bit, but rise is the best answer here. And perhaps a little bit of a definition of wry for you. That's kind of taking a negative situation and making a really dry sort of humorous comments about it. And that pretty much perfectly aligns with what's happening here. It's very wry humor in a quite serious situation. So the GAMSAT isn't really about picking the correct answer, but picking the best answer, the one that matches up the most. So that's why I have A here. The commentary provided suggests that. So this is where we have to really pay attention to the question. It doesn't want you to focus on anything else except the speech bubble. What does this provide? And like I was saying before, if we just, scroll up to here without the speech bubble, it looks like a typical scene, father and son enjoying themselves. Scroll up here, the son is terrified as soon as you look at the speech bubble. So smarter than expected for their age, probably true, but that's not really what the comment is supplying there. Child is not enjoying the activity. I like that so far. That's what I was saying. Father is aware of his child's emotions. Not particularly the case. This child's terrified and the father doesn't know it. The child is unable to communicate their needs to the father. That is true, but B is the better answer and better matches up to what the speech bubble is providing there. The very last question, question 13, which best matches the tone of the cartoon. Which best matches the tone of the cartoon. I'm going to go bottom up, relaxed and sincere. That might match if we didn't have that speech bubble there saying the child was terrified. Troubled and reflective. Not quite matching up with like the holy crap, get me out of here from the kid. Jocular but dark. Jocular meaning sort of jovial, making fun of in a joking manner. Dark meaning like sort of twisted humor. Compared that to serious but light. So I'll be tossing up between these two and have to ask myself, which is the predominant theme here, because that's the difference between the two. Light and jocular can kind of been switched out a little bit. Serious and dark can kind of be switched out a little bit with themselves. So which one is the main one? And that will come first. And this, if we just look at it matter of factly, like if this scenario is happening in front of you in real life and you could hear the child's thoughts, you would walk over and stop the father from throwing up his kid. It's like a really quite a bad situation. You don't want this kid to be feeling awful. So it is more serious, but portrayed in a light manner, which is what makes us laugh in the end. So that is section 1. I'll leave section 3 to Karim. So that's my explanations for all this. Please, if you have any questions, send them through now. Maybe give you a few seconds, 30 seconds to do that. But otherwise, thanks for listening to me, and I'll pass on to Amlan in a second. If I could give you one general tip to take away, I would say try and anticipate the questions that are going to come to you while you're reading the text beforehand. I think it's the most useful thing to do. Got a question about the Audacity answer. Audacity, this is the mental health. Comment 2. Yep, what was your question, Adivya, sorry. The audacity many people have to provide unsolicited comments. So I think that's exactly what happens. Yeah, this stranger has the audacity to make this comment and make this girl feel quite awful about her scars and probably very self-conscious. But on a wider, in a more broader sense, the problem with that is there's a lack of, well, what question C says, the lack of health literacy is the broad problem here that leads to B in a way. So because C covers that better in a much more broader sense, it would be the better answer there. For question 4, the answer A. Insensitivity in response to people's growth trajectories. So is the question, why isn't it answer A? I'm going to assume yes. I would say that's the second best answer, at least in my head. Yeah, okay, so it's the second best answer, at least in my head. and it is in a way what is happening here, and people are being insensitive. So 50-50 here, maybe I'll look outside of this text. This is about people's coping mechanisms, these 4 comments, the theme of it all. And what's the problem with this? It's almost disrespecting those coping mechanisms. Answer C is more in line with the wider all 4 comments than answer A is, although I do agree with you that is a very tempting answer, at least in my head. Yeah, definitely a hard toss up. Your question before that, when you're looking for broader versus more specific, often the question will give you that hint. So comment 2 is an example of that's talking about the whole of the comment. And I would relate that to a more broad question as opposed to, so similar, this is a broad question, pretty broad question. Let me try and find a specific one. Here you go, here's a specific one. Hones you in really on a certain line. So perhaps if it was what is the experienced by the girl at the end of comment 2, that might be a bit more specific, and you'd look a bit more through a magnifying glass there. Hopefully that answers things. Any more questions, please chuck them through. Otherwise, I think it might be Emmeline's time to shine. I'll stick around for a little bit and maybe I'll answer you guys in the DMs if you've got any more questions for about 5-10 minutes. Otherwise, I'll chuck myself on mute. Thanks, guys.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Max. And yes, exactly what Max just said. If you have any questions for him that are lingering, feel free to send it in the chat, or also I'll get Max if you could put your email in the chat as well. And if you come up with something as you're reviewing things, then let him know too. Cool. So I'm going to pass on to Amlan now for section 2. You're going to have 20 minutes, and I'm just going to let Amlan give a little bit of what he's expecting or hoping that you include in your section 2 this evening.
Hi, everyone. Can you still hear me? Yeah, okay. So first, I'm just going to talk a bit generally about what we'll be doing. So we'll get a prompt, and I did see in the poll at the beginning, there are a few of you guys for which this is the first GAMSAT. So I'll probably talk a little bit about what I am expecting. In the actual GAMSAT, you're probably going to get around 32.5 minutes per essay, but in the mock, we are going to spend around 20 minutes just so that we're not like hanging around whilst everyone is doing their essay. So within that 20 minutes, you can really do it however you want. You can either do obviously do your planning, and then you could possibly attempt like 1 or 2 body paragraph, or you could just do an intro and 1 body paragraph, really however you want to do it. And then after that, we'll kind of go through like probably one of the exemplar, and I'll kind of talk about what I like about it, what could potentially be improved, etc. Sarah, did you want me to just talk a bit generally about the overall structure that, or do that at the end?
Would people like it if Amlan gave a bit of help with how to have a go at it, or does everyone sort of know what to do? Maybe thumbs up if you'd like him to go over what to do. Cool. Okay. Yeah. So if you could just for a couple of minutes tell them, give them a few tips, that would be good.
Okay. So I would honestly say section 2 is probably the easiest to improve on, and it's the one that's the most high yield in terms of the effort they put in versus the mark gain that can happen. So obviously there is this notion that you have to use 2 separate techniques for task A and task B, and that's completely false. I can promise you that. You can write the same style, and in fact, work on whichever style you're comfortable with. And that's the one that you can use for both sections. Some people do try to do something creative, whether it be like a narrative or a poem. I have seen very little success with those methods, especially because in a stressful, time-intensive environment, it can be really hard. So I think you can never go wrong with the essay. And with essays, I tend to usually go for 2 body paragraph as opposed to the whole 3 body paragraph, purely because the more paragraphs you're writing, the points tend to become more superficial and more at the surface level. But if you go in 2 body paragraph, you can probably flesh out your points a bit more. And one thing that I do expect in your essays is that, yes, by all means, use an example if you find something relevant from your personal life or from some sort of knowledge that you have, but please spend more time analyzing it and fleshing it out as opposed to describing it, because that's something that's a big no-no in section 2. So if you're spending a lot of time just describing some sort of event or telling me about something word by word, that's not really showing any depth, okay? And that's ultimately what you're getting marked on. So that's something that's really important. And some general resources that I would point to with you guys, obviously, if you guys do our course and like the essay marking and stuff, you'll probably find a bit more about this, but some general free resources. Use TED-Eds, TED Talks, School of Philosophy, and just really come up with themes that you're passionate about. Usually when you write about something that you know about and something that you have some sort of knowledge about, your writing tends to be more interesting. And with the markers, they're really not going to spend any more than 5 to 10 minutes on an essay. So you have to really grab their attention from the beginning. I'll talk a bit more about this stuff at the end after we do an essay, because I am aware of the timing. Sarah, are you sharing the screen for the prompt? Please.
Yep. So I will, everyone has the link to the prompt. Is everyone able to see it? Can I just get a thumbs up that you're able to see it? The prompt. Yes, one.
And during this time, if you guys have any specific questions whilst you're writing, that's also fine as well. I'll answer them.
Amazing, thank you. So I do have a timer. Here we go. So I will share a timer for 20 minutes and just give it a go. And then Amlan will help you out with some more tips and advice in about 20 minutes time. Cool. Can I get a thumbs up or a nod that people are ready to have a go and try it out? One.
Do whatever you guys can. Like you can either do a planning, like intro, it doesn't have to be a fully fleshed essay, or you can try that, that's fine as well.
Yeah, perfect. All right. You can start and I'll let you know when you have about 5 minutes left. So welcome, I'll hand over to Amlan and he's going to go through some of what you guys wrote and some tips.
Okay, guys, so how do you guys find the prompt? First of all, let's discuss that before I share screen. So what did people think the prompt was? What was the theme? Anyone brave enough? Human connection, yeah. If you really, so one question that I get asked a lot is that, do I have to respond to a particular quote or do I have to respond to the overall theme within those quotes? What do we think? The reason I'm asking you guys instead of giving the answer is because it is really subjective, but usually the best response tends to come from the theme. Because if you just look at one particular quote, sometimes the quotes can be a little different, like there is slight nuance differences between the quotes. So if you just focus on one particular quote, it is easier to go down the wrong track. So I think if you just focus on the common theme, that tends to be the best one. Do you guys think you have to include the quotes that are given in the essay or like write it down or anything like that? Probably not. Anything that's already given, by repeating it again, it's not really going to yield any higher results, okay? Really, the best thing that you could do here is that within the planning time, come up with at least 2 particular themes that you're going to, not 2 themes, sorry, like 2 particular paragraphs or 2 types of response that you're going to be discussing. Some people like to do like a pro versus con essay. So like in one paragraph, they're agreeing with the theme, and in the second paragraph, they're disagreeing. And then at the end, kind of just like comparing and contrasting their final answer in the end. I would really recommend not doing that, purely because that tends to once again be at a superficial level. So hopefully you're seeing a common theme with me, is that I want you guys to go deep into like the main body, okay? And some people like to also do like a individual level. So like at the beginning in your first paragraph, you're doing at like a micro level. So how something relates to an individual. And then in the second paragraph, looking at like a more holistic approach. So like looking at the, looking at how this affects society in general. I would say it's always really good to look at society, because the more you narrow it down just to yourself, it can be hard for others to relate to, but if you're just talking about a broader implication, it can make the essay seem more mature, in my opinion. Just one, FYI, obviously every feedback or tips that we give, it is just our own opinion. I have done quite well in this section, but that doesn't mean obviously I know what Acer is thinking. So with any feedback, do take it with a grain of salt. So let me share screen and we'll go through one of the essays. So as you guys have already said, the theme is connection. So once I find out what the theme is, how I would tackle this is I would be thinking, okay, what do I know about this, or what do I want to write about this? Okay. One way I approach section 2 is through something called a lens way. So what that means is essentially you have topics that you're passionate about or that you like. So it could be something like feminism, it could be something like Indigenous Australia, so like ATSI people, and that you look at those lenses that you are passionate about or knowledgeable about, and how does this topic link to that? It's very important that when you're doing that, you don't twist the theme to fit your what you know about, because that's really easy to do, especially when you're stressed. You can be like, okay, I'm having a blank moment, so I'm just going to write about, just completely change it. And that's something you do not want to do, because you will definitely lose marks. So always stay within theme, but see how your knowledge relates to that. Okay, so let's have a look at this particular student's theme. So they're saying, okay, their plan, relationships are built on mutual understanding. Okay, so he or she is talking about that it has been corrupted by neoliberalism. So that's such a great way of doing this, because already it's interesting. If we're just writing an essay, remember there's thousands of people doing the GAMSAT. If everyone's just writing, oh, human connection is important, we need to love each other and all of that, do you really think that will be an interesting or high scoring essay? I would think not. So already that's not something I think about, neoliberalism. I'm like, okay, that's already interesting. I want to read more about this. So she has, this person has once again talked about, I don't know why I keep saying that it's a she. I don't know who wrote this, but so let's say this has led to a prioritization of self-interest. Cool. So we have been in modern society, we have been told that we need to focus on ourselves, okay? And I can already see where this essay will be going. So by focusing completely on ourselves as opposed to the connections that we have with others, what has happened is that this has led to superficial relationships. And this person is also talking about online presence. So see, you could have really taken this in any way. If you want, let's say one of your, the themes that I was talking about before, let's say one of your themes is social media. So that's something that really, whatever topic you have, you can write it from the perspective of social media. So if one of the themes was social media, you could really make this essay into a conversation about how social media has led to an evolution of human relationship and how we interact with each other, whether it be positive, negative, or indifferent, correct? So that's see how that really narrows it down and refines it to something that's tangible. That's a really good way of doing this. And I always like to, one thing that I like to do is that if you suggest some sort of problem, coming up with some sort of solutions. You don't need to have like a groundbreaking solution, but like going back on my online presence and how that leads to social media and connection. If I was doing that, I could do something like, because of the progression of social media, we are having increase in isolation, blah, blah, blah. And then what can be done about it? Just giving one or two solutions, whether it be something as simple as, maybe having a grassroots approach where we are actively educating the younger population of how to interact with each other in a manner that's sustainable and that's respectful, and maybe something else about increasing computer literacy. So people who are maybe older or who do not have competency with social media are able to facilitate discussion. Do you guys see what I mean? Like, it's like, instead of just taking it as a theme of, okay, human connection, you can just narrow it down to one particular way and give people suggestions as to what you think could be done, because that once again shows analysis. Okay, the person is also talking about broad social, the philosophical issue. So this person has obviously just wrote one paragraph. I'm assuming this is the introduction. And if we I already had a read of this a bit. My only criticism, like I said, I was a really big fan of the planning, and all the introduction was also really interesting. My only criticism was that it was really long. And because a lot of this is kind of talking in terms of almost like in first person, and also has some sort of like personal anecdotes type thing. It felt really long. I wanted the person to get into, already to tell me what their two body paragraphs are going to be about. In the introduction, you really want to provide us with a roadmap as to where you're taking your essay. I felt that planning, in fact, did a better job of telling me what the essay was going to be about than the introduction. But still, let's go through the introduction. Okay, so already at the beginning, it started with some sort of rhetorical question. So immediately grabs the reader's attention. That's good. I feel like here, it kind of started getting a bit repetitive. Like this could have been condensed much shorter, okay? Nothing goes by. Yep, we go our separate ways. Okay, some of us choose not to, but it is because we know we'll be back in the same bar. Okay, cool. Okay, so the friendship is situational. Okay. Yeah, do you guys see how here we don't really get an idea of neoliberalism or anything like that from the introduction? Do people see that? Sorry, I can see the chat button on whilst I have my screen shared. Let me see if I can. Okay, yeah, I can see it. Cool. Okay, yeah. So does anyone have any questions yet before I go in a bit more details? All good? Okay. Okay. So something else that I would definitely say is that with essays, you don't, one question that we get asked a lot is that, do I need to have like a title or anything like that? You can, if you want. If it's just a boring plain title, it's probably not going to add anything. But if you have something like snappy or something that's interesting, by all means include it, because that could, once again, grab the reader's attention. And if I was doing this essay, does anyone have like maybe something that they wrote? Like, is there, Sarah, did you put a second essay?
I literally just put something in the chat. Would you like to give an idea of what you might have written?
Oh, okay, yeah, cool.
It's all good if you don't want to.
all good. Yeah. So like I said, I would have probably tackled this from, depending on how I feel, I would probably have talked about from social media perspective. That was one of the lenses that I was talking about earlier that I'm quite familiar with. I have already kind of told you guys how I would have written it, probably in making it a conversation about how social media has affected human connection, talking about what can be done about it, okay? And something else that I could have potentially talked about is this, making this into a broader dialogue about Indigenous Australians and how you could talk about their connections, and how that has progressed. Obviously, there's many ways of taking that because Indigenous Australia is such a broad topic. You could talk about it from the perspective of how their connection with their land has affected themselves, and how, because there is something in the first quote about that, about our enduring nature. So you could talk about the connection with land and then how that affects their human connection. So that's something that I could have done, because see how that's already a bit different. Trying to think about something that makes it like, that's not like, your first instinct. So something that's a bit more different is probably gonna give you a higher mark. Something else, you do not need to be a fluent in English. This is not a year 12 English essay. That's definitely a tip. So you don't need to be including like, really fancy terminologies. You don't get marked on that. But obviously don't write in a very casual way either, because it's still, you're still looking to be a future medical practitioner. So still have that some level of formality to your writing. And if you can show something about your personality within your essay, that's also really good. So that's something we really espouse at Halad. So whether it be simple as, from your essay, can I tell that you have qualities that of a healthcare practitioner, whether it be you're showing compassion towards a marginalized group, such as like rural Australians or Indigenous Australians, or you're showing a very progressive mindset. Yes, we usually say that, you don't get marked on what you're writing, but obviously if you're writing something that's insanely controversial or very, very, I guess, against what the medical community stands for, and like as medical practitioners, what we preach, so then you probably wouldn't do as well. But usually, what you write, as long as it's, thoughtful, it's pretty good. So I always say that taking a progressive stance is probably always better. So whether it be talking about themes such as, feminism, environment, etc. So themes that are high yield. So my top tip would be make a list of themes that you're passionate about and try to flesh out any topic using those themes. Okay, that would probably be my biggest tip for you guys. Does anyone have any questions? Could you please explain comment 1 and 2? Okay. Oh yeah, things are bad all over, but the lingering 20 years of knowledge of a childhood friend's landline can only be credited to love's enduring nature. So the first quote is showing that how things can, in your current situation, you may feel that hopeless or things are really bad, but then you can always go back to those relationships that are very solid. So whether that be a childhood friendship. So this could have been a conversation about the importance of childhood friendships and how to sustain those friendships into your adulthood. That's what really the first quote is about. Second one, inscrutably involved, we live in the current occurrence of universal reciprocity. Does everyone know what reciprocity means? Nope. Okay. So reciprocity is like give and take essentially. So what you give is essentially what you get back. So in a friendship, obviously we want it to be mutually beneficial. And I think that's what the sample that I showed you guys, I think that's what this was talking about, like how relationships has gone from mutually beneficial to self-benefiting. Okay. So that's really what that one is talking about. Any other questions? Do you want to say? Yeah, exactly. So as long as you know the main theme, but it's really important that you spend some time identifying the main theme, because if you choose a wrong theme, no matter how great your essay is, you're going to score quite poorly because it's not answering the question. Okay. Do we have any other questions before I pass it on? And I think that's really the biggest tip would be getting feedback on your essay. There is no way you can predict every single essay that's going to be in the GAMSAT, because with online GAMSAT now, they have done so many different codes, like, you possibly can't cover all of your bases. So that's why having those solid lenses that I was talking about before, so that whatever topic comes, you don't have a blank state is really important. Okay. And so just really practicing essays from random code generators and also getting feedback, whether it be getting preferably from someone who has done the GAMSAT, because if you're just getting feedback from someone who has no idea what the GAMSAT is, they're probably going to assess you on your English, and this is not really an English essay. So that's something to be mindful of as well. If no one has any questions, I will pass it on to Sarah, but I'm happy to stick around for a few minutes if someone wants to type anything up. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amlan. And I'm sure that you guys will come up with questions as you go and as you start practicing things as well. So use the advice that Amlan's given you, and also feel free to send an email if you come up with a question that you want some advice on too. Cool. So we might move on to section 3. And with section 3, we've got Karim. So Karim, I might give you like 30 seconds to give them a bit of an idea of section 3 and what they're going to be doing this evening.
Okay, so in section 3, you guys will get questions in the GAMSAT based on 3 different subjects, so chemistry, physics, or biology, essentially. And nowadays, I tend to like mix match between all 3. So in the mini mock, you'll have 3 questions or 3 stems from each of those subjects, essentially. And yeah, you guys will get 20 minutes, roughly 2 minutes a question to go through all 3 units.
Perfect, thank you. And then afterwards, Karim will go over some of the content with you and some tips and things like that. I will let you know that this amount of questions you've got actually is a little bit more than 20 minutes worth. It's probably closer to like 23, 24 minutes. Just have a go. If you don't get it all done, it's more, we gave you this so that you get an idea of the different disciplines that Karim just mentioned. So if you don't finish it, that's fine. We'll give you all the answers and everything afterwards anyway. So can I get a thumbs up or a nod that you've got the questions and you're good to get started? Yeah. Cool. Okay. And I have a 20-minute timer, so you can start. Great. Okay, that is time. So just because we are running a little bit behind time, so apologies for that. But we'll give Karim about 15 minutes to go over some of the key things to get from each of the stems and also some of the questions you guys found the trickiest. So thanks, Karim. We'll hand over to you.
All right, beautiful. I'll start sharing my screen and we can go through the questions that people found the most difficult. So yeah, I feel like overall, some of these kind of questions were a bit challenging. But overall, you guys did quite well with the median score being roughly 8. So that's really good, actually. Let's take a look at some of the questions. So for question 1, the point of it was to sort of talk about like breaking things down in terms of the STEM. What you're really trying to understand is how does the information given relate to the 3 reactions that you are shown. So it's the idea that you can have this thing called the acyl halide and you react it with different reactants to produce a different product each time with a leftover sort of like hydrogen halide molecule as well. So that's essentially the summary of the STEM, and then it's about applying that idea each time in every question. So like you guys did really well with question 1, sort of applying that matching idea. Like you've got a product which is shown, which matches up with line 2. So you've got like a carbon here connected to the oxygen. There's an R group and then connected to another oxygen here and another R group. So then you know that this had to be the reaction they were talking about. So the other reactant that was involved was just alcohol only. So it's just talking about question 2. And a lot of the STEM is very similar to that idea. It's essentially just matching, essentially. You're looking for specific patterns. And so chemistry questions in the GAMSAT tend to be like that. You'll get a chemistry reaction or concept, and you'll just have to apply it in different settings. So that's question 1. I won't go through all the questions. The one that stood out to me was question, so let's go through 3 and 4. Okay, oops. Okay, so question 3. So in question 3, an alcohol, and it tells you that alcohols and carboxylic acids can also be combined to form esters. Which of the following compound could not have been used to form? And then it gives you the like letter formula of an ester. So whenever you're given the letter form of something, it's really useful to try and draw it out for yourself. So what I would do if I was in the GAMSAT is I would actually draw that molecule on a piece of paper. And so you've got COO, CH2, CH3. So everything on this side will end up forming your acid. And then everything on this side will end up forming your alcohol. So if you break it down, that will give you options A and B. And then based on the STEM as well, we know that an acyl halide could be used to make an ester. So according to like the second line here. So you could match this option C as being an acyl halide. So that could also be used to make the ester. So correct answer has to be option D. All right. So that was that concept there. And for question 4, this one involved a lot of stoichiometry. So just as a general tip, when you guys are handling stoichiometry in the GAMSAT, it's really useful to break things down into mole amounts. So first of all, start off by asking yourself what you're after. So you're after the mass of the acyl halide that was initially used. So this is the acyl halide that was initially used. So you're after the mass of that. Now they give you the molar mass. So if you know the mole and the molar mass, you can figure out the mass that was used. Essentially, what you also need to do is, you know, that the stoichiometric ratio between all of these compounds is 1 to 1. So you can use the pH, which is 2, and the volume, which is 2 liters, to figure out the amount of mole of HCl that was used. So you use N equals CV essentially. And if you figure out the mole of hydrogen chloride that was produced, you know, because of the stoichiometric ratio, that there is the same mole of the acyl halide. So then you would just multiply that by the molar mass. I wish I had the math written out to show you guys, but that's essentially how you figure it out. Is there any chance you could solve this, or would it take too long? Yeah. So that's the point. You can definitely solve for this. So you just need to figure out the mole of the HCl, which you can get by using the concentration, which you can get from the pH, and then the volume. So you times those two things together, and then that tells you the mole of acyl halide that was used, and then you would just multiply that by the molar mass, and that will give you the mass. Okay. Any questions about the first SEM at all? If not, we'll keep moving on. So let's have a look at question 2. So there wasn't 4 moles. So let's do the actual numbers. Okay, so the pH of the solution is 2. So then you know that the concentration of hydrogen is 10 to the negative 2. You then multiply that by the volume, which is 2 liters. So you've got 2 liters, or like 2 essentially, times 10 to the negative 2 would be the mole of hydrogen. So the mole of hydrogen is 0.02. So that is also the same mole of the acyl halide. So then you do 0.02 times 134, which will be 2.68 grams, because essentially it's 2 times that divided by 100. Does that make sense? You guys will get the full written explanation of this, so you will actually have the answers. But the point that I really want you guys to walk away with for this particular question is, whenever you're faced with stoichiometry problems, figure out the mole of everything involved, and it'll make your life a bit easier. Cool, I'm glad that made sense. All right, we'll move on to the next question. So let's see how you guys went. B was great, A was great, and sorry, first question, second question were good. Okay, well, maybe we can go through this last one. So the main thing to take away with this problem here is that you are given a theoretical concept that's physics related, and then a formula attached to it as well. So then you would just essentially need to combine those two concepts together to answer the questions. But yeah, it's essentially taking, you know, a formula that they've given you and understanding what each of the variables are. That's really, really important. So whenever I see a formula in the GAMSAT, I always try to think, like, what do each of these variables mean? And how does that help me get to the answer? You don't always need to sort of use it. Question 7 is probably, the most tricky. The reason being is because it's all about intuition. So about trying to understand the scenario that you're given. So they're asking you, you know, if you've got a strong gravitational field, it causes light to take a longer path, which results in time dilation. So compared to a stationary object on Earth, an object in geostationary orbit is expected to experience greater time dilation, less time dilation, no change, or there's not enough information given. So the main thing to think about here is that the Earth is rotating, and so an object in geostationary orbit is also rotating at the same rate as the Earth. So that means an object on Earth will have the same velocity, because it's spinning, as an object that's in geostationary orbit. So they're both spinning at the same rate, so they both got the same velocity, so that's really important. And the only difference between the two objects is that one is in space and one is down on Earth. So the one in space will experience a slightly smaller gravitational field, in which case it'll experience slightly less time dilation. compared to the object on Earth, because it's in a slightly smaller gravitational field. So its clock will go slightly, let me think about this, it'll go slightly faster. It'll go slightly faster. So how do we know it's a smaller gravitational field? So based on the fact that it's in space, so it's further away from the mass of the Earth, hence the gravitational force will decrease the further out that it is. It's a small difference when something is in orbit because it's still experiencing Earth's gravitational pull, but it is a smaller difference. It says space. Yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah, but it's it's further out in space. It's sort of the thing to think about. Yeah, good question. So sometimes a lot of these physics questions require you to sort of think about things a little bit more intuitively. But yeah, I do see where you're coming from. But you have to apply your understanding of the physics to the STEM as well. Like you don't just operate completely blind. Yeah. All right, we'll move on to the last question just because of time. So the tricky thing about this question is it requires you to take the STEM and two tables and sort of combine them all together into a whole and try to look at everything together and how it all relates to each other. So let's look at what you guys struggled with most. So this question was okay. That was okay. Okay, so actually guys did really well in this, which is great. So the one that people struggle with the most would probably be the first question. So let's go through that. Whoops. So the first question, a negative stranded DNA virus requires which of the following enzymes to form mRNA? So let's have a look. There was a bit of a split between A, C, and D. So negative single strand DNA. So if we go to this table here, okay, so that would fall under group 2. So it's single stranded DNA virus. In this case, doesn't matter whether it's positive sense or negative sense. But in this case, it's negative sense. And it's asking you which of the following enzymes would it require to form mRNA. So in this particular question, I think I wrote something down here. It's essentially asking what enzyme do we need to convert DNA to mRNA. So if we look at table 2, we're asking about the conversion of DNA to mRNA. So option D in this case is correct. The thing that is like distinguishes why options A and C are also wrong is because it's talking about which enzyme it requires to make mRNA, rather than what enzymes it might need. So a little bit tricky with the wording there. Like you might not need DNA, like you could use DNA polymerase. So you could go, negative single strand DNA to positive single strand DNA to mRNA, which probably does happen. But it's really asking like what is required overall to actually form mRNA. So yeah, that was sort of tricky. Any questions about that one? Oh, okay. So we've just had a question about, could we do the time dilation formula question? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so for this question, an observer measures the time dilation of a moving clock to be twice that of a stationary clock. What speed was the moving clock traveling relative to the stationary clock? All right, so the key idea here is that this square root has to be a positive number. That's really important. And this whole thing has to end up being some sort of fraction. So it can't be some amount bigger than 1. And then the ratio between T and T0 has to be 1 to 2. So the stationary clock is moving twice as fast. Sorry, no, it's not moving twice as fast. It's experiencing less time dilation compared to the moving clock. So moving clock experiences more time dilation. Essentially, its time is stretched. So if you replace T0 with 1 and replace T with 2, you just then need to just go through the math of it. So you just do the algebra. Essentially, you'll end up with -3. The square root of 3 on 4c will be the correct answer. I hope that made sense. Yeah. So exactly right. So the bottom half of the fraction has to equal a half. Correct. Yeah. All right, good. Any other questions about any of that stuff? The thing I want you guys to take away from each STEM, the first one, how to relate a STEM to the reactions that you're given. The second STEM is how to relate a STEM to the formula given. And then the physical situation and how it applies in the real world, especially with like question 7. And then with the last STEM, it's how to relate, the STEM and the 2 tables that you're given and how they interrelate. And, just like the wording of the questions is also really important.
Sorry, Cream, I know we're running out of time, but could we maybe go through question 9? I was just a bit confused as to why we chose C instead of D.
Yep. Okay. Let's have a quick look. So reverse transcriptase has a role in the life of which of the following viruses? And then you were comparing between C and D. Okay. So group 6 is single-stranded RNA with a DNA intermediate. So that means you start off with RNA and then you're switching to DNA. So reverse transcriptase has to be required for that, because if you go to this table, converting, where is reverse transcriptase? Converting RNA to DNA, you're going to require reverse transcriptase. Option D was group number 3. So that was converting single-stranded DNA to double-stranded DNA, intermediate, and then to mRNA. So the single-stranded DNA to double-stranded DNA, that's going to require...
I think you're looking at group 2 instead of 3.
Oh, sorry. No, you're right. My bad. Okay, the order of the enzymes required to synthesize mRNA from single-stranded DNA.
No, sorry. It is question 9, but the options for C and D are 6 and 3 respectively, and you were looking at group 2 and 4 instead.
Was I? So, okay, well, group 6 is this group here. So single-stranded RNA to DNA. So that's RNA to DNA, that's going to need reverse transcriptase. And then group 3 is this group here, which is double-stranded RNA viruses. And you're wondering why, oh yeah, I'll see what you mean, like why they might need reverse transcriptase. They don't tell you that it requires a DNA intermediate. So that will be the only reason why I wouldn't choose that one.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Cool, thank you.
All right, it's all good. Any other questions, guys, before we wrap up? Keep asking questions in the chat. I'm going to pass it over to Sarah. But yeah, I really appreciate you guys. And I hope you liked the mock exam that we put together for you.
Cool. Thank you so much, Karim. I know Karim's still the last man standing, last one here, but also really grateful to all of the tutors who helped out this evening. And I'm sure you all got at least one thing from it. So thank you for coming along. Yeah, great. We do have a question in the chat about a little bit more about Halad to Health, what we do and intensives. I'm guessing this question has to do more with like other GAMSAT things that we have on offer. So I will send out an email with the recording and I'll send out some different options for you. But since you're all here till the end, I do have the explanations for you. And I also have a link for the intensives if you want to check them out. But we do run paid courses. We're going to be running, I guess we're already running intensives at the moment, but we've had a lot of popular demand. So we're opening them back up. And in about 2 weeks' time, we're starting another, what we're calling delayed stream. So if you go to the link, you'll find information about the delayed stream and what classes are on offer there. And we're also going to be starting mock exams. I believe it's the first week or the second week of February, and you can choose to sit a couple of mock exams as well if you would like to, with all new content for you to try, and you can also get feedback on the essays you write for those. So would strongly recommend just go have a look and check it out, and also send us any questions you have. I'll send out our emails in the recording as well, but I would also recommend if you have questions and would like a quick response to hit us up on our Facebook page and just send us a message on there. And there's always someone manning that chat and we can answer any questions, particularly if you have things about courses, which course to choose, what you should do next, etc. We're happy to help you out with that. So, by the way, does Halad have an essay marking service? Yes, we also do have an essay marking service. It is a separate link to this one. I'm happy to send that one out as well with the recording for you. And you can put in as many essays as you want. I think it's like up to 4 at a time or something that you can get marked by one of our Section 2 markers. Intensives are very similar to this class in that you'll have a tutor. It'll be one of these tutors or someone else who's similar but not the same person, but each class will be either Section 1, Section 2, or Section 3. So it won't be a combination like tonight. And each week you'll go over a different like focus of that section, depending on, so Section 1, for example, each week you go over a different text type. For Section 3, you'll go over like a different core concept, and then you'll go over lots of different like examples. And then Section 2, you'll get guided through from start to end on how to write a good Section 2 piece. So they're all slightly different, but they're all designed to make you GAMSAT ready. So if you're not sure which intensives to do, whether you should do them, whether you shouldn't, either send me an email and we can talk more about it and like where you're at and what would be good for you, or you can message us on the Facebook chat. Happy to chat to you about that. Yeah, no worries. But also if anyone wants to stick around and has any like questions or personal questions or anything about what they should do next with GAMSAT prep, feel free to stick around. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming along tonight, and I'll send out the recording as soon as I can so that you can review everything and get the links that you need. No worries.